2 weeks that kill you. A man walks out of a county jail in central Ohio on a Tuesday morning. 30 days clean. Not by choice, by concrete and steel. He didn't get better in there. He just didn't have access. His body dried out. His head cleared. And somewhere in those 30 days, without anyone telling him, his brain quietly did something that is about to end his life. It lowered his tolerance. The dose he used a month ago, the amount that used to get him through a single grey morning, his body can no longer survive. He doesn't know that. Nobody warned him. So on Thursday, 2 days out, he uses the exact same amount he always did, and it stops his breathing on a bathroom floor while a radio plays in the next room. This is not a rare story. It's the pattern. In the first 2 weeks after release from incarceration, an American's risk of dying from a drug overdose runs more than 100 times higher than the general public's. 129 times higher, according to the landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2007. More than 100 to 1. Not because these people are weaker, because they quit, because their brains healed just enough to make the next dose lethal. Here's the part nobody tells you. The most dangerous moment in the entire life of a heroin addiction is not the high. It's the recovery. The finish line is where the bodies pile up. We are taught that quitting is the end of the story. The credits roll, the addict gets clean, and the hard part is behind them. That is one of the most dangerous things Americans believe, and it is completely, provably wrong. What actually happens to the human brain after that last dose is a months-long biological ordeal that almost nobody understands, including the people living through it and including the country that spent a century punishing them for it. This is the story of that brain, what breaks, what heals, how long it takes, and why the people selling you the cure knew the truth the whole time. This is where it begins. The lock that was waiting. To understand what happens when you quit heroin, you have to understand something that sounds impossible. Your brain was building the receptors for heroin hundreds of millions of years before the poppy ever existed. Before humans, before mammals. The machinery that heroin hijacks is older than the species using it. Go back to the beginning. The opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, was domesticated by Neolithic farmers around the Western Mediterranean somewhere between roughly 5600 and 4000 BC. Archaeologists found seed capsules tucked into woven grass bags in a cave near Granada, in what is now Spain, carbon dated to that window. People were cultivating this plant for its milky sap thousands of years before there was a Rome, a Greece, or a written language to describe what it did to them. To put that in American terms, they were harvesting opium roughly 7,000 years before the United States existed as a country. Longer before the Declaration of Independence than the Declaration is before you. But the poppy is only half the story. The other half was already inside the human skull, and it took until the 1970s for anyone to find it. For 100 years, scientists knew that morphine and heroin latched onto the brain and did something profound. What they could not explain was why. Why would the human brain come pre-equipped with a docking site, a specific, high-precision receptor, perfectly shaped to receive a chemical from a flower it had no evolutionary reason to expect? It made no sense. It was like finding a lock in your chest with no key anywhere in nature, waiting. Then, in 1973, 2 researchers at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland, Candace Pert and Solomon Snyder, nailed it down. Using radioactive tracers, they proved that opiate molecules bind to specific, dedicated receptor sites in the brain. That same year, teams in New York and Sweden landed on the same discovery independently. The lock was real. It had an exact shape, which meant one staggering thing had to be true. If the lock exists, the body must make its own key. The brain's own heroin. It does, and when they found it, it rewrote everything. In 1975, at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, John Hughes and Hans Kosterlitz isolated the key from brain tissue. 2 tiny molecules they named the enkephalins. The brain, it turned out, manufactures its own opioids. We now call the whole family endorphins, a word that literally compresses endogenous morphine, meaning morphine made from within. The work was so foundational, it earned a share of the 1978 Lasker Award, America's most prestigious medical prize. Picture what that means. Put yourself inside a single second of it. A driver rolls their truck on a wet road outside Amarillo. The cab crumples, the world spins, and then stillness. And in that stillness, before the wreck even settles, the driver notices something that will haunt them later. They are calm. There's no pain yet. There's a strange, warm, floating detachment, a sense that everything is somehow fine, even as blood runs down their arm. Bystanders will describe crash survivors like this again and again. Eerily peaceful, almost serene in the first moments after catastrophic injury. That is not shock in the vague way people mean it. That is chemistry. That is the brain, reading a life-threatening emergency, cracking open its own reserve and flooding those ancient locks with its own internally manufactured opioids, dosing the body against pain that hasn't arrived yet, buying a few clear seconds to survive. Your brain did that for free, on its own schedule. It has been quietly doing versions of it your whole life. When you finish a hard run and the ache turns warm and golden, that's the same system, a small measured release into that same lock. When a parent holds a newborn and the whole room goes soft and safe, same machinery firing on cue. Your body runs a pharmacy. It's been running it your whole life. It doses you in careful, tiny amounts, for pain, for bonding, for reward, for the quiet feeling that things are okay. That gentle, regulated drip is the baseline of being a functioning human being. Now understand what heroin actually is. Heroin is not a foreign invader that forces a door. Heroin is a counterfeit key, a molecule shaped so much like your own endorphins that it slides into that same ancient lock. Except it doesn't arrive in a careful trickle. It arrives like a fire hose aimed at a garden. It floods every receptor at once, with a force your own biology never produces and was never built to handle. The rush people describe, the warmth, the safety, the sudden conviction that nothing is wrong anywhere in the world. That's not a new feeling. It's your oldest feeling, your body's own reward, turned up to a volume that does not exist in nature. And here is the trap, the whole trap in one sentence. Your brain cannot tell the difference between too much of its own key and too much of the fake one. It only knows the lock is being hammered far harder than it should be. So it does the logical thing. It starts taking the locks off the wall. That decision, the brain protecting itself, is the beginning of everything that comes after. It's why quitting hurts. It's why quitting takes so long. And it's why quitting can kill you. Hold on to it, because we're about to watch it happen in slow motion. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel covers the hidden histories behind the things that shape the world. Real stories, real numbers, no filler. New video every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Whether you're in Texas, New York, or somewhere in between, I always want to know. How the brain rebuilds itself around a drug. Every empire in history worked the same way. It came in, took over the local economy, and rebuilt the entire region so the region could no longer function without it. That's exactly what heroin does inside your head. It doesn't just visit the brain, it occupies it, restructures it, and makes itself the capital. Start with dopamine. Dopamine is your brain's motivation currency, the chemical that tags things as worth wanting. A good meal, a paycheck, sex, a win for your team, a text from someone you love. Each one releases a modest, meaningful pulse of dopamine, and that pulse is your brain saying, do that again. It's the entire reason humans get out of bed. Natural rewards give you a bump. A satisfying dinner might give you a small, warm rise. Heroin gives you something that dwarfs all of it. The surge it triggers in the brain's reward circuit runs many multiples above anything a natural reward can produce. In the currency of motivation, a good day at work pays you a few dollars. Heroin pays you a windfall no honest job ever could. And your brain, which is fundamentally a prediction machine, notices immediately. There is now one thing in the entire world that pays orders of magnitude more than everything else combined. So the brain reorganizes its whole economy around that one thing. This is where the receptors come off the wall. Bombarded day after day, the brain does what any system does when it's overwhelmed. It turns down the volume. It reduces the number of available opioid receptors. It dials back its own endorphin production. Why keep the little pharmacy running when a flood arrives from outside? It blunts the dopamine system's sensitivity, so the constant tidal wave doesn't fry the circuit. Neuroscientists call this downregulation, and it is the brain's rational, self-protective response to an impossible situation. But it has a devastating consequence. The brain has now rebuilt itself for a world with heroin in it. And in that rebuilt world, heroin is no longer a luxury. It's the baseline. It's the new sea level. Take it away, and the water doesn't return to normal. It drops far below where it ever was before the drug arrived. Fewer receptors, less natural opioid, a dopamine system that's gone deaf. That's not a person choosing pleasure over responsibility. That's a nervous system that has been physically remodeled brick by brick into a state where it cannot generate ordinary okayness on its own anymore. Understand that, and you understand the single cruelest fact of addiction. By the time it's fully established, the drug is no longer producing a high. It's producing the mere absence of agony. The user isn't chasing euphoria. They're chasing the floor they used to stand on for free. And this same remodeling is exactly why the man from the beginning of this story died. Follow the mechanism. The brain that has torn down its receptors to survive a daily flood needs a bigger and bigger dose just to reach that flood. That's tolerance. And in heavy use, it climbs to levels that would kill an ordinary person outright. Then he goes to jail. 30 forced days with no drug. And the brain, sensing the flood has stopped, quietly starts rebuilding, putting some of those receptors back on the wall, turning its own sensitivity back up. He feels no different, but his tolerance has collapsed toward baseline. So when he uses his old, enormous tolerance-scaled amount 2 days after release, he isn't taking the dose that got him high last month. He's taking a dose calibrated for a brain that no longer exists. And it shuts his breathing down. His recovery is what killed him. Not because he failed, because nobody told him his own body had changed the rules while he wasn't looking. The first 72 hours. So what happens when the flood stops? Let's put you inside one body, one room, one shift of it. It's hour 18 after the last dose. The first thing is the yawning, endless jaw-cracking yawns that won't stop. Then the nose starts running. Then the eyes, a strange, grief-like streaming with no sadness attached to it yet. By hour 24, the skin turns hypersensitive. The brush of a cotton bedsheet feels like sandpaper. Then come the waves, hot, then cold, a bone-deep chill that no blanket touches, sweat soaking a shirt through in a room that isn't warm. The gut turns inside out. Muscles in the legs and back seize and twitch with a restlessness so violent that people kick involuntarily in the sheets. There's a reason the old street phrase for quitting cold is kicking the habit. It's literal. The legs kick. And underneath all of it, threaded through every hour, is a single, screaming, non-negotiable message from the entire nervous system. This is wrong. Fix it. You know exactly how to fix it. That message is not weakness. It's your brainstem, the ancient survival core, treating the absence of the drug as a mortal emergency, the same way it would treat suffocation or starvation. The addict trying to quit is fighting the part of the brain that keeps you breathing. For heroin and other short-acting opioids, the acute storm typically begins within a day, peaks somewhere around day 2 or 3, and starts to lift after about 5 to 7 days. And this is the exact point where America's understanding of recovery falls off a cliff. Because most people, including most families, most employers, most judges, most of us, believe that when the visible sickness ends, the addiction ends. One brutal week, and you're through. You are not through. You are barely at the trailhead. The sickness was the easy part. Quick question, and I genuinely want your guess in the comments before I tell you the answer. How long do you think it actually takes a human brain to reset after the last dose of heroin? Not the sickness. The sickness passes in a week. I mean the brain itself, the receptors, the dopamine, the machinery of feeling normal. A week, a month. Drop a number. Hold that thought, because the real answer is the whole reason this video exists, and it's coming. The long climb, and the photograph that proves it. After the acute withdrawal fades, a second phase begins. And this one doesn't announce itself with sweats and shakes. It's quieter, longer, and in many ways more dangerous. Clinicians often call it post-acute withdrawal, the long tail. And while its exact borders are still debated in the research, the lived pattern is consistent and brutal. Weeks to months of flattened mood, wrecked sleep, foggy thinking, irritability, waves of anxiety, and above all, anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from anything. Remember why. The brain tore its own reward system down to survive the flood. Now the flood is gone, but the system is still torn down. So the recovering person walks out into a world that has gone colorless. Food tastes like nothing. Music that used to move them lands flat. Their kids laugh, a sunny day, a win, a warm bed. The whole menu of ordinary human rewards that carries the rest of us from Monday to Friday returns almost nothing, because the machinery that reads those rewards is still offline. They did the hardest thing they've ever done. They quit. And their reward for quitting is a grey, joyless, exhausting slog that can stretch on for months. Is it any wonder the relapse rate is what it is? But here is the turn. Here is the hope buried in the biology, and it is real, and it is measurable. The brain heals, slowly, unevenly, but genuinely. The receptors come back, the dopamine system reawakens, color returns, and we can prove it with a picture. At Brookhaven National Laboratory, a US Department of Energy lab out on Long Island, New York, a research team led by the neuroscientist Nora Volkow ran one of the most important brain imaging studies ever done on recovery. Using PET scanners, they photographed the reward machinery of chronic drug users at different lengths of abstinence. The study focused on methamphetamine, so the exact numbers are specific to that drug. But the principle it revealed applies straight across the addiction landscape, and it changed how scientists think about the recovering brain. Here's what the scans showed. In users who'd been clean only a short time, under 6 months, the dopamine machinery was visibly, measurably depleted. On the PET image, the striatum, the deep brain region that runs reward and motivation, shows up in false color. And in the early abstinence brains, those regions read cool and dim. The reds and yellows of a healthy reward system faded down to sickly greens and blues. A radiologist glancing at it would see a system running on fumes. That dimness lines up exactly with what the person is living. The flat, colorless, nothing feels good months. But when the same people were photographed again, after 12 to 17 months of staying clean, the picture had changed. The dopamine transporters, a key marker of a functioning reward system, had climbed back up by roughly 19%. On the actual scan images, you can watch it happen, a brain lighting back up. Regions that were dark and starved at 6 months, glowing again at 14. Published in the Journal of Neuroscience in 2001, it is one of the closest things science has ever produced to a photograph of a human being healing. But read the timeline again, because it's the entire point. Not a week, not a month. 12 to 17 months for the reward system to substantially recover. Over a year. That is the gap. That is the tragedy in one number. The sickness ends in a week, but the brain takes a year or more to feel normal again. And nobody tells the person that. So they white-knuckle through the vomiting week, expect to feel fine, walk out into the grey, conclude they are broken or weak, and go back to the one thing that they know will flip the lights on instantly. Not because they're bad, because they were never told they had 11 more months of climbing to do, and because the country they live in built its entire response to addiction around not telling them. And for decades, America was sure it already had the answer. This is the false dawn in the story, the comfortable belief that quietly got people killed. The answer, we decided, was willpower, character, a firm hand, and a clean break. The whole architecture of the classic American rehab was built on it. The 28-day program, cold turkey, hit your knees, white-knuckle the sickness, graduate, and go home fixed. It fit the national mood perfectly. This was the country of just say no. And on paper it looked like treatment. Real facilities, real counselors, real families remortgaging the house to pay for a month. But look at what that model does to the brain we've just described. It takes a person, strips the drug out over a couple of weeks, waits for the visible sickness to pass, and then, right at the moment their tolerance has cratered and their reward system is at its dimmest and most fragile, it discharges them. Graduation day lands the newly clean addict squarely inside the deadliest window there is, with a body that can now be killed by a fraction of their old dose, a brain that won't feel normal for another year, and, most damning of all, usually no medication to hold the floor steady. Then, when a staggering share relapse, the system doesn't question the model. It blames the patient. Weak. Didn't want it enough. Failed the program. The program, built on a theory of willpower, was engineered to fail the biology, and then to call that failure a moral verdict on the person it failed. That's the false dawn. Now here's what was hiding behind it. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the story you were told. Do me one favor. Hit subscribe. It's the single thing that helps these deep dives reach more people. Okay, back to it. Because this next part is where it stops being history and starts being about you. The country that decided healing was a crime. Now we've seen what the brain actually does. A physical rewiring, a year-long climb back, a documented, imageable biological process. So here is the question that should make you angry, and I mean genuinely angry, because the answer implicates policies still on the books today. If the science is this clear, and the core of it has been clear since the 1970s, why does America still treat the recovering brain like a character flaw instead of a healing wound? The answer is that the United States made a decision, early and hard, to define addiction as a moral and criminal failing rather than a medical condition. And once that definition was locked in, everything downstream followed from it, including the deliberate, documented strangling of the one thing that actually works. Because there is a treatment that works. That's what makes this a scandal instead of a tragedy. But first, understand that the decision to treat healing as a crime is older than most Americans realize. Older than the war on drugs, older than the 60s. Back in 1914, a federal law called the Harrison Act was written mainly to tax and regulate opioids. On its face, it left doctors free to treat addicted patients. But in the years right after, the Treasury Department's narcotics agents quietly reinterpreted it, deciding that a doctor who kept an addicted patient stable on a maintenance dose was not practicing medicine at all, but committing a crime. By some estimates, that reinterpretation turned around 200,000 Americans who had been managing their condition under a doctor's care into criminals overnight. Physicians were arrested. Clinics were shut. The message, set in the 1920s and never really rescinded, was carved into the country's bones. Keeping an addict alive and functional is not care. It's dealing. That is the soil everything else grew in. Now, the treatment. In the 1960s, two researchers in New York, Vincent Dole and Marie Niswander, tried something almost nobody in that climate would touch. They gave stable daily doses of a long-acting opioid medication called methadone to people with severe heroin addiction. And they watched, half expecting to just be maintaining a high. That's not what they saw. They saw the opposite. The patients didn't nod off. They calmed down. The obsessive, all-consuming hunt for the next dose simply switched off. because that ancient receptor system was finally being held steady. No flood, no crash, just a flat, stable floor for the down-regulated brain to stand on while it slowly, over months, rebuilt itself. People who had been unreachable started showing up. They held jobs. They went back to school. They got their kids back. The relapse and death cycle broke. Later, a second medication, buprenorphine, did something similar and even safer. Together, these are what doctors now call medications for opioid use disorder. And the evidence for them is overwhelming. Studies show that starting people on these medications can cut the risk of overdose death after release from incarceration by around 75%. 75%. There is a treatment that cuts the death rate in the deadliest window by 3/4. So you would assume America made it as easy to get as a flu shot. It did the exact opposite. The decision that caged the cure. In 1972, as methadone treatment was proving itself, the federal government made a choice about how Americans would be allowed to get it. Not whether, how. And the how was this. Methadone for addiction could not be prescribed like a normal medicine at a normal doctor's office, the way you'd get medication for your blood pressure or your thyroid. It had to be dispensed through special, tightly controlled, federally regulated clinics, opioid treatment programs, where patients often had to show up in person every single day, stand in line, and swallow their dose in front of a staff member before going to work. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. That single administrative choice, to cage the one proven medication behind clinic walls instead of letting it flow through the ordinary medical system, quietly shaped the next 50 years of American death. Because the clinics were few and the country was enormous. To this day, the entire United States is served by only around 2,000 of these opioid treatment programs, roughly one clinic for every 165,000 Americans. If you live in the wrong county, rural Mississippi, the mountains of Kentucky, half of Wyoming, the nearest one might be a 2-hour drive every morning, forever. For a person whose brain is screaming and whose life is already in pieces, a 2-hour daily commute to stay alive is not a treatment plan, it's a wall. And when buprenorphine arrived, the safer, take-home medication that could have been prescribed by any family doctor in America, the government walled that off too. Under a law passed in 2000, a physician couldn't just prescribe it. They had to obtain a special federal permit, sit through extra training, and then were legally capped on how many patients they were allowed to treat. It was nicknamed the X waiver, and most doctors, faced with the hassle and the stigma, simply never got one. So the medicine that stops the dying sat behind a federal permit that most of the medical profession declined to apply for. Do the math on what that meant. A treatment that cuts overdose death by 75%, gatekept so thoroughly that even today, only about 1 in 4 Americans who need these medications actually receives them. 3 out of 4 go without the thing that works. And when they relapse and die in the grey months that nobody warned them about, the country files it under personal failure. This is not a foreign problem. This happened in American agencies under American law, signed off by American officials, decade after decade. The FDA, the DEA, and Congress all had roles in a system that treated the recovering addict not as a patient healing, but as a criminal in remission who had to be watched, restricted, and disbelieved. What it costs right now. Let's put the price of that century-long decision in numbers you can feel. Since 1999, more than 1 million Americans have died of drug overdoses. More than 1 million. That is more American dead than we lost in World War I, World War II, Korea and Vietnam combined. An entire additional century of war casualties produced at home, in bathrooms and bedrooms, and parked cars, while the cure sat behind a permit. For Americans between 18 and 44, the heart of the working-age population, from the college dorm to the mid-career mortgage, drug overdose is the single leading cause of death. Not car crashes, not guns, not cancer, overdose. For that entire generation, the deadliest thing in America is this: At its recent worst, the country was losing around 190 people a day to overdose, a fully loaded regional jet falling out of the sky every single day with no survivors all year long. Around 4.8 million Americans currently live with an opioid use disorder, more people than the entire population of the city of Los Angeles. And the annual death toll, even now, after real declines, still runs in the tens of thousands. Recent federal figures put 2025 at just under 70,000 overdose deaths. That's a mid-size American city, think Flagstaff, Arizona, erased from the map every year. The cover-up here isn't a single shredded memo. It's quieter and more damning than that. It's the way an entire system kept insisting, through its laws and its clinics and its permits, that the problem was the moral fiber of the people dying, when its own scientists, working in its own national laboratories, had already photographed the truth. The brain heals. The medicine works. The death is preventable. They had the pictures. They built the policy anyway. The reckoning has been slow, and it's come mostly from researchers and clinicians who spent decades saying the same thing into the wind, that this is a disease of a rewired brain, not a failure of will, and that treating it like a crime kills people. In December of 2022, that pressure finally cracked the wall a little. Congress eliminated the X waiver. As of the end of that year, any doctor in America with a standard license can prescribe buprenorphine. No special permit, no patient cap. 22 years after the wall went up, it came down. 22 years. And methadone is still locked in its clinics to this day, where this lives in your life right now. So let's bring it all the way home, into a building you'll walk into within the next few days. Go to your local CVS or Walgreens. Walk past the greeting cards and the reading glasses to the pharmacy counter. Since 2023, sitting on that shelf, over the counter, no prescription needed, next to the allergy medicine, is a small nasal spray called Narcan, naloxone. It is the antidote. Spray it up the nose of someone whose breathing has stopped from an opioid overdose, and it knocks the drug off those ancient receptors and restarts the lungs. It can pull a person back from the dead in 90 seconds. That it sits on an open American shelf today, purchasable by a teenager with pocket money, is the entire story compressed into one object. A century of treating this as a moral failing. And now, the emergency has become so ordinary, so woven into daily American life, that the reversal agent lives between the cough drops and the vitamins. Somewhere in your town, this week, someone will buy it. Someone will use it on a person they love, and that person will get another shot at the year-long climb. Now, the answer to the question I asked you earlier, how long does the brain take to reset after the last dose? Not the week of sickness. The brain. The best imaging we have says roughly 12 to 17 months for the reward system to substantially recover. Over a year of grey before the colour fully comes back. So if you know someone in their third month clean who tells you they feel dead inside, that nothing is working, that they must be broken, they are not broken. They are on schedule. Their brain is a construction site at month 3 of an 18-month rebuild. The single most useful thing you can know about heroin recovery is that the flatness is not failure, it's healing that hasn't finished. What the whole story was really about. Slow down with me for the last minute, because the arc only makes sense from the end. It started with a lock in the human brain older than our species, and a key our own bodies have always made. A quiet internal pharmacy, dosing us with just enough okayness to get through a life. Heroin is a counterfeit of that key, and the tragedy of addiction is that the brain, doing the smartest thing it knows how to do, dismantles its own pharmacy to survive the flood, and then has to spend more than a year rebuilding it in the dark. And the deeper story, the American story, is what we decided to do with that knowledge. We had the science. We had the photographs of brains healing. We had a medicine that cut the dying by 3/4. And for 50 years we chose, through law and habit and stigma, to lock the cure behind clinic walls and federal permits and call the people dying weak. The gap between what we knew and what we did is measured in more than 1 million graves. That gap is the thing to sit with. How many times have you watched someone struggle with a bottle, a pill, a habit, and quietly concluded they just didn't want it badly enough? How many things about how this country treats its own suffering were decided in some office by some rule written in 1972 that you never got to vote on and never even knew was there? Let that sit for a second. I'm not going to answer it for you. If you've ever watched addiction touch someone in your own life, and in America, that's most of us, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the real history behind the things that run your life, subscribe. Hit the like button. It tells me you want to keep going deeper. And share this with someone who still thinks quitting is the finish line, because it might be the thing that makes them stay in the room with somebody for one more grey month. Here's where it leaves you. The next time you walk past that pharmacy counter and see the little box of Narcan sitting out in the open, you'll know what it really is. It's not just an antidote, it's a confession. It's America finally admitting, on a retail shelf, what its own laboratories proved 50 years ago and its own laws refused to believe, that these were never bad people who chose oblivion. They were human brains, doing exactly what brains do, trying to climb back to a normal they could no longer feel, while the country that could have handed them a ladder decided, for 100 years, to hand them a sentence instead. And now, you can't walk past that shelf and unsee it. If you or someone you know is struggling with opioid use, the Sam Hesse National Helpline is free, confidential, and available 24/7 at 1-800-662-HELP 4357. And the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is reachable by call or text at 988.